The last part of last Sunday's gospel was do not judge, and you will not be judged. What it was referring to is rash judgment. We sometimes think we see something and we judge what it is, but it may not be the truth. And that can cause someone a great deal of problems. I don't know if I ever told you this story about myself. I was in the seminary, home for Christmas vacation for a couple weeks, went back to the seminary, and the rector called me to his office. And he said, I just called in to find out what you were doing on your vacation. And I said, well, what do you mean? I said, I spent the time mostly with my family. We had Christmas party and New Year's party and so forth. And he said, well, there's a woman in your parish who called. And she said there was something that I ought to know, that you were seen with the woman and a child. And obviously you're not married to the woman, but the child is yours. And I said, whoa, what do you mean? And then I found out that she was talking about a New Year's Eve party at our church. And it was my sister, Kathy, and I. The pastor said, why don't you come to the New Year's Eve party? So we did, and we were dancing. You know, we had a good time. And then the next day, Mom needed some things from the store, and I had a baby brother who was just about 6 months old, and I decided to take him to the store with me. I was just trying to bond with my brother. I'd be going back to school, and Kathy went with me. So the three of us were in the store. We put the baby in the basket, and we're walking around getting things. Well, the same lady that saw me at the party saw me in the store with the baby. So she concluded that Kathy was my wife and the baby was mine. Total misjudgment. And so the rector said, well, let that be a lesson to you. He said, you know, people, when you're a priest, you're going to be going to a lot of places. And he said, people will judge what you're doing there. And so he said, you got to be careful. And I thought, oh my. Fortunately, none of what was told was true, but could have hurt me badly. But you see, it's just one example of my own life. You feel terrible when you've been lied about. You know, when somebody makes up something about you that's not true. So the scriptures are telling us we shouldn't do that. There are times, however, when we should judge. For example, if you're going to want to marry somebody, don't you spend some time judging that person's character, judging their compatibility with you, judging their values, judging what's most important about them in life? You're going to want to know a lot of things about that person before you actually marry them for the rest of your life. So you need to make a judgment, but you base it on facts that you learned from dating each other. And we have to always be careful because we don't want to misjudge anybody. Parents have to judge their children sometimes. They're raising them, and if they judge that their child's behavior is not good for them, whatever they're getting into at this point, they have a responsibility to sit down with their child and talk to them about what they're doing and why it's wrong and why it's hurtful to them. So they're judging them, but they have a responsibility to do so. So we have to just look at each situation where it is. It's easy for us just to judge and rash judge, and that's what we have to avoid. And so the scriptures today are telling us that it's what's in our own heart. When he says this line about, why do you try to take the splinter out of your brother's eye when you have a beam in your own eye? I can remember my dad when we were young, if somebody went wrong or somebody was in trouble, and if I would point to somebody that they did it, he'd say, well, you know, you're pointing one finger, but there's 3 other ones that are pointing back to you. And I used to think of that, you know, I'm judging that somebody did this, but maybe I ought to look at myself. Or, you know, here today sometimes, I mean, what the scandal that's going on in the church today is so horrible. The horrible abuse that's taken place on the part of clergy and even bishops against people, against children, and even against adults. It's been embarrassing and it's been so difficult. But I think we have to be careful that we don't judge the whole church. There are sometimes You know, some people have talked to me saying, I just don't go to church anymore because you're all hypocrites. Well, that's a rash judgment of every person in the church. There may be 100 priests or bishops that did something wrong, but there's about 20,000 that did not. And I think that's what we have to remember, that we can't judge everybody by the whole. If a fireman does something like that, we don't condemn all firemen. You know, if a policeman does something, we don't condemn all policemen. And I think we have to be very careful. We make a judgment, yes, it's obviously true that a terrible scandal has happened. We need to pray, we need to ask God's forgiveness, we need to do something to help not to happen again. And that's so very true. But I think we have to be careful that we don't go overboard and condemn the whole church, because it's not true. And so I think Jesus is just saying that in the gospel today, to be careful about what we say about others and what we judge. Sometimes we can use the judgment of others as an excuse for not looking at my own faults. I think we have to look at our own faults, you know, when we are judging someone else as well. So there's some important things in the readings today. The Lord wants us to produce good fruit in our own lives. And that happens if we take truth into our own eyes. If we try to live the truth, if we try to know the truth, and if we try to forgive when someone does wrong, then we're doing what Jesus would do. So we ask the Lord today to help us see ourselves as he sees us. So if there is something wrong, we can change it. And also that if we see something wrong in our brother, and that's fraternal correction is important too, isn't it? If you have a friend that's doing something that you know is harming them, we have an obligation, if we can, to charitably talk with them and say, you know, I see that you're doing this and you're hurting yourself, you know, what can I do to help you to get out of this? I think that's fraternal correction, and that's important. So overall, we don't rash judge. When we see something factually that is wrong, we treat it with charity for whoever is involved. And always, of course, know the truth before we speak.